Hi everyone, welcome back to this playlist on effective teaching strategies. I am currently in the middle of marking season, so I thought it might be helpful for me to do a brief video on how you can use audio feedback for your summative assessments. Let's start with why use audio feedback. So from my perspective, I think audio feedback offers several advantages. I think firstly, it's more personal. You get to convey the tone of your voice as you're giving feedback. And I think it's generally more encouraging. I guess it depends on what you're communicating though, doesn't it? But I think it's easier to communicate encouragement to students with using this type of feedback. I've also found students often find it easier to understand and engage with, and this is particularly for students who might have a specific learning difference. When they can hear the feedback, they're like, oh, okay, yeah, I get what you're saying. I think it can also save time compared to writing all of the written comments. I certainly know it saves time for me. And I think it allows for those more nuanced explanations. Like I know when I write in-text feedback on a student's written work, I try not to do this, but I tend to be drawn more towards writing kind of those grammatical corrections, where actually I need to be providing feedback on the learning outcomes and the competencies. And I find when I record my feedback, I talk a lot more to those nuanced explanations around competencies and learning outcomes. So it's a very different type of feedback when you do audio feedback. Does audio feedback work for all types of assessments? Well, no, not necessarily. I think you do need to pick your assessments carefully. I tend to use it in my modules where what a student is sharing is probably more personal than what they would be sharing in other assignments. So for example, the one I'm doing right now, students submit a reflection, and those reflections are really personal about their experiences on placement. So I feel an audio feedback is a more appropriate response to that type of feedback. I don't tend to use it for, like for example, with my dissertation, my research dissertation literature reviews, there would just be so much I would have to say. I think it would probably defeat the purpose of it. I have also used it with practical assessments. So if you're doing a practical assessment with students, once they've left the room, you can audio record your feedback immediately at that time point, and then you've captured a lot of the key things you want to be communicating with students. So it doesn't work for all types of assessments, but it can work for a lot. Do all students find it helpful? Well, no, I don't think it will work for everyone. I don't think there's such a thing, but actually on the whole, I get really positive feedback for it from students. Although I have had some students say to me, oh, please don't do audio feedback, Claire, because I don't know, I think they feel a bit anxious about opening that file and listening to it because they're not sure what's going to be coming. So in those situations, I just say, okay, fine, I'll do written feedback. So you might have to be prepared to offer alternative approaches, particularly around accessibility for students. Can all lecturers do this type of feedback? Well, I think you really need to know yourself. And I know some lecturers I've spoken to are like, oh, but sometimes like I'll have told a student or advised them, don't do this in your assignment. And then you're reading it at the summative assessment point and they've done that. And then you're just really annoyed with them. And if that's the case, that will come across in your tone. So I think you just need to know yourself and figure out if this is something that you could possibly manage. And yes, I felt silly the first few times I did it because no one really likes the sound of their own voice on a recording, do they? But when I realised how much it was helping my students, I figured I just needed to get over myself and do it. And now it's a regular part of my teaching practice. So setting up for audio feedback, you'll need 3 things. 1, you'll need a quiet space to record from. 2, you'll need a good microphone that will work. I tend to use the one on my laptop and that's perfectly sufficient. And then you need some way to be recording the feedback. So I use the marking setup at my uni, which is called Turnitin. So this is an example of what it looks like. You've got your rubric in the top right-hand corner. So if you click on that, you can put the different learning outcomes. Then there's an area where I'd normally write my traditional written feedback. But then actually, if you look towards the bottom, there is an option to record. So if you click on that, that opens a new screen. And you can see me, here I am, hi. I turn the webcam off because I don't want to record my face as I'm doing it. But actually, once you've done that, then you're ready and you're set to go. Oh, sorry, there is a screencast option as well, but I just disable that because I just want to capture the audio. You hit go, it gives you a countdown, and then it's as simple as that. You start doing your recording. So whatever it is you want to say, when you're finished, you stop it. You then can save the media and it will save, as you see in that top right hand corner, and that's what the student will press play on when they're ready to hear their feedback. If you don't have that type of system set up at your university already, have a chat with your learning technologist because they will probably be able to help you find a way around it. If you are having to record separate audio files, then there is more in the way of admin, and obviously you just need to be mindful of all the GDPR things, naming things appropriately so you get the right feedback to the right students, but the learning technologists are great for helping figure out that kind of thing. In terms of what you record, here is how I've learnt to script it. So I will always start with a friendly greeting. I will thank them for the submission. For example, thank you for your reflection and your action plan from your learning on placement. Then I go on to talk about what I really enjoyed, and then you pick an aspect, or I'm glad you picked this because, and then you explain why. I will then say something like, I've added some in-text comments, which I hope are helpful, but I'll just talk through some feedback in a bit more detail. And I do those in-text comment directly onto the assignment to help students see specific areas of feed forward. And I do this, as I said, because you naturally fall into providing very different types of feedback with audio, as it tends to be more that big picture stuff rather than specific detail. So I find a few more specific comments just helps to balance this out for students. I will then go on to say what I thought you did really well with this, whatever the assignment is, and then I draw on some of the positive points, which I've drawn down from the learning outcomes around what they did well. And then I say something along the lines of what would have strengthened it would have been, and then you include your areas for feed forward. So I know they have another written submission coming up soon, so I link my comments explicitly to that so that they can then apply the learning, feeding it forward to that next submission. I will then close with another thank you, and that I can see the learning that's taken place, etc., etc. And so you're ending with encouragement and next steps going forwards. And just a few more points around best practice. So aim to keep it 3 to 5 minutes. Any longer, students probably won't listen to it, so try to be as consistent as possible. Make sure you use a conversational tone, like don't go into all formal language as you're doing it. Students want to hear your personality and that tone coming through. That's really important for them. Make sure you reference specific parts of the marking criteria, the competencies, the learning outcomes, so that they can hear how the feedback applies to the learning for that module. And then lastly, just go careful with the adjectives that you use. So if in your audio feedback you keep talking about, oh, this was excellent and that was excellent, but then actually you give a student a grade 55, that language of excellence doesn't align with a student being given a grade 55. So what I tend to do is I'm far more delicate with how I word things. So I say, this was great, it was brilliant you did that, I really liked that, this was lovely, this was helpful. That way, actually, when you go through the moderation process and someone looks at your marking and how you've done it, actually they might say, oh, I think this grade boundary needs to go up a bit or down a bit. And then all of a sudden you've got yourself into a pickle because you've said excellent throughout, but actually your moderator's like, no, this needs to come down a bit, and it's more towards the very good end of the spectrum. So just go careful with your adjectives. If you want to access more information on this, I've published a couple of papers in this area, so I'll put those links in the description below. But this is what I did for my teaching qualification. It was a systematic review of all different types of alternative feedback, so audio, video, screencast, podcast, etc. So check that out if you want to see those other alternative ways. And then this was a follow-up piece of primary research I did with understanding student feedback, preferences on feedback. And I've used the learning from this research to inform how I do my feedback and enhance my practice. So do check those out if you want more information. And that's it. For me, audio feedback really has been a game changer because I just think it's more personal, it's more efficient, it definitely gets a better response from students than the more traditional feedback. So if you do give it a go, I'd love to hear how you get on with it. Please feel free to post in the comments below whether you loved it or you hated it. I just think it's helpful to try these things, isn't it, to be developing our practice. As always, thanks for watching. If you found this video helpful, then please feel free to like it, subscribe and share it with other people who you think would benefit from learning around student engagement, teaching assessment strategies and enhancing our practice. And I hope to see you in another video. Bye.